I invite you to join me in the very beginning of your Bible, Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. This morning I am happy to announce to you that we are going to begin a new series of lessons. This series will take us for the next 6 or 7 weeks or so. And if I have calculated my dates right, I believe that this will take us through the end of the month of May and kind of set us up for our summer study that will be taking place over the summer months. Before I tell you about what we're going to be doing over the next little bit, though, let me first put kind of a little tease in for what we're going to be doing this summer. Not too long ago, Olya had an idea that she picked up from a book that she was reading not too long ago about how a church, one particular summer, in order to kind of create interest, you know how the summer months, things always drop off, people are traveling, all that kind of stuff. And so in order to kind of create some interest, they decided that they were going to allow the congregation to choose what the preacher was going to preach on. And in order to do this, basically what they did is they put a box at the back of the auditorium, and they allowed people to write any question about the Bible or any subject about the Bible that they would like to see addressed, and then he would spend the summer addressing those particular subjects. Well, Olya talked to me about doing that, and I thought it was a pretty neat idea. And so during our last elders meeting, I took it to the elders, and they really liked the idea as well. And so this summer, we're going to do something like that. And this is basically how it is going to work. Beginning in the month of May, I will have a box there at the back of the auditorium on the table back there, and you will have the opportunity for the month of May in order to put any Bible question or any subject that you would like to see addressed in that particular box. I will ask that you keep it anonymous, that you do not write your name on there so that we're not choosing according to people but according to the subject. And what will happen is at the end of the month of May, myself and the elders will go through that box of questions, and we will choose 10 or maybe 12 that we are going to talk about over the summer. Now, obviously, we have about 75, 80 people in here, so we're not going to be able to get to everybody's subject that we would like to address, but we will go through and choose the ones that we think would be best fitted, and we will do that. And so I thought this might be a good way to create some interest over the summer. And I hope by doing that you will be greatly blessed. So keep in mind as we approach the month of May, any kind of question that maybe we have never addressed before, or any biblical subject that you would like to see addressed, write it down on a piece of paper, and then during the month of May you can place it in a box at the back of the auditorium, and we will do that for the summer. All right, so that is our plans for the summer, but let's focus our attention now in the present moment in our new series of study for the spring. For the next 6 to 8 weeks or so, I would like to share a series of lessons with you that have been growing on my heart over the last several years. It has been my intention a couple of times to do something like this, but I just never really felt like I was quite at the point where I was ready to address it. But I think I am now, or at least I hope that I am now. And for the next several months, I would like to share with you a series of lessons that I have entitled God and Work, or if you like a fancier name, the Theology of Work. Let me tell you a little bit about why this is something that I have been thinking about over the last several years. One of the things that has concerned me about the church over the last little bit, and even indeed my own rhetoric as a preacher from time to time, is that there is this idea out there that basically there are 2 levels of work in our life. There is, of course, the job that we do for a living, that we get paid for, or sometimes that we may not get paid for, but still have to do. And then there is also the work that we do for the church. And traditionally, these 2 things have been seen as separate entities. Our work for the church is seen as a part of our religious duty, while our job is something that we do in order to make a living or in order to provide for our family. And there are, of course, a few select jobs that have what we would call like a vocational sort of calling to them. But for the most part, a good number of jobs don't fall into that kind of category. And therefore, what ends up happening is the various kinds of work that do not fall into what we would call a vocational sort of category. Well, let's just say the ones that do fall into that category, they get elevated, while those that don't may be seen as something that has to be done, but certainly of a secondary value, we might say. And also along with that, there's this strain that sometimes comes in trying to discern just what does it mean to be a Christian and to work. If you were to take a survey among people today, as actually has been done in certain areas, a lot of times you will hear answers like, well, it means to be a witness for Christ at your work. Or it means abstaining from certain activities that other of your coworkers might readily participate in. Or it could mean making as much money as you can in order that you could give as much money as you can. Now, none of these things are wrong, of course. I think in many ways we would give a hearty amen to many of those things. However, is that all that we are to understand about what it means to be a Christian and to work? So with questions like that in mind, over the next couple of months, I would like to do my best to present to you a theology of work. I realize, of course, that not everybody in this congregation is working at the moment. Some of you are retired. Some of you may be stay-at-home moms or homemakers. Still others of you may be looking for work and may be having trouble finding work. That's okay, because as I talk about a theology of work, I am not merely speaking about things that we get paid to do, although I certainly mean that as well, but also the things that add value to our lives and, of course, the lives of others. Many times that will involve the job that we are paid to do, but many times it will involve a number of other things as well. So with all that in mind, in this series, I would basically like to answer three fundamental questions in regard to God and work. First, I wanted to answer the question of why it is that we work. In other words, why is it that we need good and meaningful work in order to live a fulfilled life? Second, I want to answer the question of why work is so hard. In other words, why does work seem so fruitless at times and even pointless and certainly very difficult? And then finally, I want to answer the question of how we overcome the various obstacles to work and we find satisfaction in the work that we do through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And my hope is through this series of lessons, you will find it to be a blessing to you. And I certainly hope that it will give you a more robust understanding of the place of work in our lives and why it fits into God's overall plan for the world. So with that in mind, let's go to work on this first question. Why is it that we need good and meaningful work to live fulfilled lives? To answer that question, we are going to begin here at the very beginning of our Bibles in Genesis chapter 1. So read along with me if you're willing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. And God called the expanse sky. And there was evening, and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. And God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on all the land that bear fruit and the seed in it according to the various kinds." And it was so. And the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in accordance to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. And let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars, and God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." And so God created the creatures of the sea, and every living and moving thing of which the waters teem according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the livestock and over all the earth and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work that he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all of his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. As we begin this series of lessons together on work, I want to share with you this morning a little short story about the nature and purpose of work in God's scheme of things. It's a wonderful little story. As a matter of fact, so wonderful is it, I wish I had time this morning to read the whole thing to you, but I don't. So since I don't, I will just kind of hit some of the highlights of this particular story. The story is a little tale told by J.R.R. Tolkien. Many of you all will know Tolkien as the great and famous writer of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And if you've never read the Lord of the Rings before, I highly recommend it to you as something you ought to put on your bucket list before you die. I just recently finished reading the Lord of the Rings, and while I don't think it would be a prerequisite into getting into heaven, I certainly think if you've read it, you will have a higher place in heaven when you get there. So I'll just mention that to you. Anyways, for those of you who know a little bit about Tolkien and his writing of the Lord of the Rings, you may know that at one particular point in his writing, he came at an impasse in his story. At that particular time, he had been weaving together the stories and the narratives of all these characters, and as all these plot lines were crossing and come together, they were so complex, and they needed such a great finish in order to complete this great story that he was telling. He came to a point where basically he was stopped in his work. You see, Tolkien was something of something that many of us can identify with, I think. He was a bit of a perfectionist. And on top of that, he was very prone to worry. And so as he faced the complicated task of drawing all the strains of this story together in his great epic mythology, The difficulty was such a burden on him, he despaired that he would ever finish his great life's work. Add to that the fact that Hitler was now on the move, World War II was just beginning, and it was not altogether clear that England was not going to be invaded by Germany. Tolkien was not sure that he would ever get to finish his great life's work, and obviously that was an awful, awful thought to him. So in the middle of his writing of The Lord of the Rings, as he was stuck in this moment of despair, an idea for a little short story came to him. And he wrote it down very quickly, and he had it published in a magazine, and it became known as the little tale called Leaf by Nigel. And the story goes something like this. There once was a little man named Nigel. Nigel was a painter, though he wasn't a very good one, really. His problem was he was too meticulous. And on top of that, Nigel was sort of a kind-hearted man, although he was often a little grumpy about his kind-heartedness. And he had neighbors who very much depended upon his kindness. Also, Nigel was preparing to go on a journey. It was not a journey that he really wanted to take. As a matter of fact, the idea was rather distasteful to him. But nonetheless, it was a journey that he was going to have to make. As life went on, Nigel became very focused on painting one picture in particular. He had this vision of a leaf. And the vision of a leaf turned into a vision of many leaves, which turned into a tree. And that whole tree turned into a country with forests and mountains in the background. And it was this great picture that was in his mind that he wanted to paint. Nigel very much wanted to paint this picture, but because of his scrupulousness, he never made much progress on his picture. He was the kind of painter who would spend days on end getting one leaf just right in order that the whole picture would be perfect. And you add to that all of the distractions that came from his neighbors who were always needing his help. Nigel never got very far in his painting. He considered it, however, to be his great life's work. One day, however, at a time unexpected for him, a stranger showed up at his door and told him it was now time for him to go on his journey. Nigel did not want to go. His painting was far from finished. But that didn't matter. He had no choice. He had to take the journey. As the story unfolds from there, you find out that the great journey that Nigel must go on is a metaphor for death. And as Nigel takes this great journey, he meets two voices who judge his life. One voice is harsh and renders judgment over the time that Nigel wasted in his life. The other voice is gentle, though not what you would call soft. And it spoke about all the good that Nigel did for all of his neighbors. The voices you see are the twin voices of justice and mercy. Finally, the gentle voice, the voice of mercy, wins out. And Nigel is now allowed to go on his journey. And so as he boards the train and moves on to his next destination, as he gets off at the next train depot and he steps off into this new land, there before him is the tree, and it's completed. And not only was the leaf completed, but the whole tree and the whole land and the forest and the mountains, all that was in his imagination, now laid out there before him. Only it wasn't a painting now. It was actually real. At that point, Nigel realized something that he had not realized in his life before. This was a gift. And the work that he had begun with starts and sputters in his life, the work that he had only really partially completed, was now a part of the reality of this new world, forever to bear fruit in the ages to come. The story, of course, is a parable of sorts. It is a parable that Tolkien actually found great comfort in. In many ways, it's the story that we relished last Sunday morning as we told the Easter story. In this life, our work often seems so difficult and disconnected We have all these ideas about what we want to accomplish and what we want to do in life, and we think that our fulfillment is tied to it. And yet what Nigel experienced is what Tolkien was experiencing, and in fact, in one way or another, is what we all experience. As much as we may try to do, as much as we may try to accomplish, the nature of our life, and especially our work now in it, is very subject to frustration. And yet, despite that, even though our work is full of frustration, we need work of various kinds to live purposeful and meaningful lives. And so the question we must consider this morning is, why? Why is work so crucial to us? The answer to that story ultimately comes in the answer to that question, ultimately comes in the story that I have read for you here this morning, the story of creation. As a matter of fact, it gives us two answers to that particular question. The first answer is going to seem rather obvious as I state it, but as is often the case with obvious things, sometimes it needs to be pointed out every now and again. And the obvious thing is this: the creation story tells us that God is a God of work. You know, I think a lot of the richness of the creation text for us gets overlooked these days, because in the last number of decades, any time that we read the creation account in the Bible, we're almost always doing it in a sort of way that we're focusing on comparing it with modern scientific theories. And we're trying to figure out what, if anything, is historical about this, what, if anything, is scientific about this, what is to be taken as literal, what is symbolic. But to do that, I think, in many ways, is not to accept the text on its own terms. When this text was written, it was not trying to prove itself in a scientific sort of way, but it was trying to tell us truth about the nature of the world that we live in and who we are inside of that particular world. Think about it. Have you ever considered the fact that the creation story is laid out like a Hebrew work week? As many of you are probably aware, the Hebrew work week was a unique thing in the ancient world. In most of the pagan empires of the ancient world, you did not have a day off. When the Israelites worked as slaves in Egypt, you did not have a day off. But instead, in God's graciousness in the lives of the people of Israel, He demanded a day off. Not only for the people of Israel itself, but for any foreigners who might be in the land, for any slaves who were there working for them, and even for the animals. 6 days they were to work and to labor, and then on the seventh day they were to rest. They were to have a day of leisure. The creation story is told in the form of a work week. God works and labors for 6 days creating the earth. And then on the seventh day, or rather on the sixth day, He creates mankind to watch over the earth. But on the seventh day, God rested. Now, there are a lot of interesting points that we could draw an application to that story, including the importance of having a Sabbath in our life, which we'll talk about in the weeks to come. But one of the foundational things that we see from the creation account is that God is a God of work, and that work itself is a good and wonderful thing. That, by the way, is in contrast to the creation stories of the pagan world. In the Babylonian creation stories, work is a result of man's inferior status to the gods. The gods create mankind in order to do the work that they themselves are not willing to do. In ancient Greek and Roman culture, work, especially in the form of manual sorts of labor, is the work of slaves. The true life is the life of leisure, the life of the man who doesn't have to do manual work for his living. Not according to the biblical picture of creation, however. In the biblical account, God is a God of work. He is a creator. He is, in fact, a gardener. He works, and therefore work is good. Which leads then very nicely to the second point that we can draw from the creation story. Not only is God a God who works, but He created mankind in order that they might work. Now, here's where we often get things messed up. In a couple of weeks, we will talk about how work plays into the curse of disobedience. Many of us already know about that curse, and we understand that when man and woman rebelled in the garden, hard and difficult labor became part of this work that is a part of our life. But don't misunderstand. Work itself is not the curse. Futility in work is the curse. That is something that we all experience, and there is a reason why we experience it. But make no mistake about it, work is not a curse. Work was always a part of God's intention for mankind. And the reason we know this is because of the distinction that is made in the creation story between man and woman and all the other creatures of God's creations. To the plant and the animal life, God gave this command: be fruitful and multiply. That was his command to them. He also gave that command to the man and the woman, didn't he? Be fruitful and multiply. Fill up the earth. But along with that command that we share with the plant and animal life, he also says this in Genesis 1:28. Man and woman are to rule over the earth and to subdue it. When God tells man and woman that they are to subdue the earth, we get our first indication of what God's purpose for mankind was. We often think that the world was created completely self-sufficient, that there was no labor actually to be done. But that's not true. God made the world in such a way that we were to apply our labor to it so that we might bring the earth under our control and make it even more productive than it was in the original creation state. This was always God's intention. It remains God's intention. Now, yes, of course, that intention is mixed up with the futility of the curse, but the purpose for us remains the same. We are to subdue the earth in order to make it more fruitful and more productive than it was originally. And what that means practically is your work matters. And it is part of God's intention for the world. Whether or not you feel that your work is a calling or a holy vocation, let me tell you, your work matters. Whether or not you are paid to do a job or not, your work matters. Why? Because it is part of the way that God has ordered the world in order that the creation might be more fruitful and that everyone is provided for in the things that we need. So as we examining the opening story of the Bible, we now get our first clue as to why work is so necessary for us to live fulfilled and meaningful lives. God is a God of work, and because we are made in God's image, we too are creatures that were made to work. Now, is leisure a wonderful thing? You bet it is. A wonderful, wonderful thing. But work is also very crucial for us. So crucial for us, as a matter of fact, that God thought we could stand 6 days of it compared to 1 day of leisure. Now, if we had been in charge, we probably would have made it the other way around, right? Let's have 6 days of leisure and 1 day of work. Can I hear an amen to that? Or at least we might split it in half. I'll have 3.5 days of leisure and 3.5 days of work. Well, the numbers or the hours are not what's important, of course. What matters is that we are all participating in the subduing of the earth. God is a working God, and He made us to be a working people. Next week, as we continue with our lessons on the theology of work, we will continue to explore further this question of why we need work of various kinds to live fulfilled lives. And more specifically, we will focus on the idea of work as cultivation and service. And I hope you plan on being here next week. Let's stand and sing together.